Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. So I will read the land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge the indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, we would like to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between indigenous communities and to improving our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. We are called to reflect and acknowledge the effect of colonialism and residential schools on indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a quick outline of what we will be covering today. So we will introduce a little bit about OCASI's accessibility initiative. We'll talk quickly about accessible services and resources, why accessibility matters, any key points to note, and then we will go through some more specific budget considerations. And then we will have a Q&A. Again, for the Q&A, please use the Zoom Q&A feature. So to find that, I think you have to go under more, and then there's an option that says Q&A. Yeah, next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce OCASI's Associate ED, Adaptability, and she will introduce the accessibility initiative. It's all yours, Eda.
Thank you, Miyuki. So my name is Eda Oldab. I'm the Associate Executive Director of OCASI. So we have three speakers, Miyuki just talked, and Tekla. They will talk, they will present their part. I want to talk about OCASI. So OCASI was formed in 1978 as a collective voice for immigrant serving agencies and to coordinate response to shared needs and concerns. OCASI is a registered governed charity governed by a volunteer board. OCASI has more than 240 member agencies across Ontario. OCASI's mission is to champion equity and human rights for immigrants and refugees through advocacy, collective action, collaboration, planning, research, capacity building, and information and knowledge transfer. OCASI is committed to enhancing the capacity of settlement service workers and assisting in their efforts to develop and deliver innovative and effective services to newcomers. One of the many initiatives of OCASI is the Accessibility Initiative. We have several capacity building initiatives. One of them is the Accessibility Initiative. This initiative is a national bilingual project, and it aims to enhance the knowledge and skills of settlement sector practitioners so that they are better equipped to serve newcomers with visible and invisible disabilities and the deaf community. This initiative has created a range of online professional development activities, tools, and resources to assist organizations serving newcomers in creating accessible and inclusive space for newcomers. The Accessibility Canada Act is based on the principles that organizations must consider when developing their program and services. Dignity, everyone must be treated with dignity. Opportunities, everyone must have the same opportunity to build the life they want. Barrier-free access, everyone must have access to full and equal participation in society. Choices, everyone must have meaningful options and be free to make their own choices with support if they want it. So to ensure that product and services that organization offer meet accessible requirements, you must budget for accessibility. If you don't budget it, there is no money because it requires more money, and they will, both of them, they will talk about the fees and the options to make services available. So that is what we are going to focus. Thank you for coming, and I will pass it to Tekla.
Thank you so much, Eta. So we'll go straight to the presentation. Accessibility is about providing equitable services. Equity in the sense that we recognize that each client has different circumstances, and allocating the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach their equal goal or outcome when they come to seek services in our organizations is very important. An accessible service only applies when clients can make use of the available services and resources without experiencing limitations or barrier of any kind. Therefore, it is crucial for the settlement sector to consider the importance of accessibility budgeting in the ongoing call for proposals by the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. Since this is considering that it is about designing for the different needs of clients, especially those with disabilities, accessing settlement services and resources. It is also a requirement of the law, and we need to proactively identify these barriers and work towards removing them so that service delivery and participation may be accessible in every way possible for the clients we serve. Next slide. So why does accessibility matter? First, it is the right thing to do because it fosters inclusivity and provides equal access to all clients, especially newcomers to Canada with disabilities. The law in Canada requires that services and information be accessible to everyone, regardless of their background and status. For example, the Accessible Canada Act of 2019, which applies to the federal organizations, aims to create a barrier-free Canada for individuals with disabilities, whether you are a newcomer or whether you are a citizen or whether you are a temporary resident. If you are a provincial agency, please refer to what are the specific law provisions on accessibility, which will be important in guiding you on what you need to budget. Also be aware and open to the culture and diversity of the clients that we serve. For example, just putting or acquiring an interpreter in place does not ensure access unless we consider certain factors, such as cultural knowledge of how to use language or words. Always remember, clients are not obliged to disclose their disability when seeking these services. But know for sure that some may be having invisible disability, for example, chronic pain or mental health that one cannot see or perceive. Also understand that some may process information in certain formats well or not. That's why we need to make this consideration and budget for the accessibility budget, which is dedicated to responding to the needs of all the groups of people and clients we serve in our communities. Next slide. So these are the key points to note on budgeting for accessibility. First is the money or the budget. So if an agency is hosting an event, or you're planning an online or in-person event, first you need to have the money necessary or the budget necessary to provide access, for example, language interpreting or sign language services. The second point to note is time. So when you are budgeting for these events or for the accessibility, always consider the length of the length that is going to take. If it is a meeting, a workshop, or even a webinar, or whatever you are planning, always plan for that so that you are able to budget for it in a very efficient way. Knowledge and skills. The contracted service provider who is supposed to provide the accessibility service should at least possess minimum skills and knowledge of what they are required to offer. For example, someone who is coming to offer interpretation services for a settlement sector who is offering an event, they should at least be able to understand the basic language and terminologies that are used in the sector. Also, at least they should have a brief background on the topic and also understand the audience they're coming to serve. Also, another important thing to consider is when you are budgeting, how many people are needed to provide a certain service. For example, how many sign language interpreters are needed for an online event? And then the final point on that is plan for access from the beginning. Don't wait until registrations are received. For example, canceling interpreting services with enough notice is much easier than trying to book an interpreting service with short notice, because that brings also inaccessibility in its own. So we are just going to look at some budget considerations. So the first consideration we are looking at is language translators for, sorry, the next slide, Adele. Next, yeah. So the first item we are looking for budgeting is language translators, and this is on-site or in person. So if a newcomer comes to your agency and this person maybe doesn't speak English, you need a translator to translate from the original language to the spoken language, either English or French. So this can be either oral, or maybe you can use an electronic equipment. Always when you are budgeting for this and when you are sourcing for a person, always remember a few tips. For example, the cultural understanding between the two people. That is the person who is providing the language translation and the client. So the budget estimates for one translator is about $19.20 per hour to $44.23 per hour. And this depends with the experience and also the expertise of the person that you are contracting. Next slide. So the next budgeting allocation we are looking at when we are doing the IRCC proposals is the deaf interpreters and ASL interpreter, that is on site or in person. So first, the deaf interpreters from a different language to English is very important for the people who are not able, who are deaf people, and also those who have hearing impairment. The ASL interpretation eases the effective communication between the client and also the service provider. So typically when you are budgeting for this item, always consider in-person requests, typically have a 3-hour booking a 3-hour booking, and that is minimum. And also this booking, it goes with mileage coverage that you need to budget for. So it is for the mileage, it has to go 0.6 cents per kilometer. And then also depending on the nature of the request, the service provider may give a consideration not less than 2 hours, but mostly it is 3. So to be on the safe side, always plan for 3 hours for in-person activities. So the cost for that, for one SL interpreter, for a minimum of 3 hours, each person being paid 100 to 150 per hour. So here you are talking about 2 SL interpreters for every event, or if it is 1, then you are looking at 150 times 150 times 2 hours. That is $300 for that event you are planning for. And if it is 3 hours, then it will be 150 times 3 hours, where you will get 450 per one in-person event. So calculations always should be based on 2 people, because for the ASL interpretation, they have to be switching at least for 15 minutes for every event that they participate in. So you are looking at a total of at least $906 for a deaf interpreter or an ASL to English interpreter. And that is inclusive of the mileage or the cost of transportation. Next slide. So also we have braille papers, printers, and braille devices. So these services for the clients who could be having the eye impairments, or maybe they cannot see well. So the braille paper actually is different in texture. It's a thick paper, and also it goes well with a braille printer. And also it is important to have a braille machine in case you are having clients who are visually impaired. So the estimate for a light braille paper price per sheet is $3.95. And if it's a heavy braille paper, because of the good quality, it goes for $8.95. And then for the braille printer, we'll go for at least 5,000 to 6,500. And then for the braille writing slate, it amounts to a minimum of $20 to $85. So depending on the quality that you want to purchase. Next slide. So we are going to look at the cost of the online events. I will use an example of Zoom. So if you are acquiring American Sign Language, an American Sign Language interpreter who is able to provide services for those who are having hearing difficulties or deaf people. And also, it also ensures that the people who are deaf, they're able to access your services in more equitable manner. So the tip for budgeting for this is always budget for two American Sign Language interpreters for any given event. And for every event you book, it has to go with a practice session, which is 1 hour. So if your event is 1 hour, always plan for extra 1 hour. Those are 2 hours. And for one ASL per hour, they are paid at least $150 per hour to around $315 per hour. So we are looking at 2 interpreters because you cannot budget for one. So that is 300 for one ASL times 2 hours. That comes to 600. And then plus HST, which is 13%. So we are looking at 678 for an ASL interpreter for one event, which is online. And please budget for this item so that people need these services that are not justifying or requesting for them from an agency, so that if they are able to find these services available, they're able to participate more fully and more equitable like other groups of people. Next slide. So another component that we need to consider for budgeting, it is CAT in full, that is communication, access, real-time translation. So the captions are always important because they are able to give access to the people who are not able to attend your sessions, and also people who are deaf. Also, the captions are important to enable people to learn best, especially those who read, so that they can understand better about your event. And also, when you are offering your online event, people may want to refer to your recording later. So the captions will serve as a very important factor at that point, as they will be able to refer to the content in the video. So the tip for budgeting for this, always budget, at least this one is for one person, and it is always for 1 hour. And also you need to include a practice session, which is 1 hour. Although you may get someone who provide the practice session in minutes, but to be on the safe side, consider 1 hour practice session budgeting. So the total, we are looking at 2 hours budgeting, and it is one captioner. So it will be 150 to around 200 per person, depending on where you will get the services. And then also you will need to pay for the edited transcript when your event is done. And that goes for $65 to $100. And then in your budget, also include the assignment coordination fee, which goes for around $35. And then plus 13% HST. Also, we have the quality assurance test. It goes for $68 for every 30 minutes. That is for the writer. So for the captioning services for one event, we are looking at an estimate of $520. Next slide. So another component is simultaneous translation for online events. So these are for cases where you are providing a bilingual event, let's say English and French, and maybe the primary language that is being offered is English. So you need a translator will be translating the content that is being presented from English to French. So the budget tip for this is always 2 simultaneous interpreters are needed for every event. And also it is 2 hours for every event. And then an hourly rate, not minutes. So we are saying budget for hours and not minutes when you are doing the budgeting for that event. And then the budget estimates for this one simultaneous translator goes for $1,200 per hour. So if you are doing for 2 hours, that is $2,400. And then we are saying that each budgeting has to have 2 people on board, that is 2 translators. So a budget of $2,400 of one person times 2. So that is $4,800 per hour. So plus HST, the total comes to $5,424. So I'm going to invite my colleague Miyuki to give us the budget consideration for web accessibility. Welcome, Miyuki.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you, Tekla and the Accessibility Initiative for inviting me. I'm actually not part of the Accessibility Initiative. At OCASI, we have a team called IT and Digital Services, and I am the UX Design and Web Development Coordinator, but I also have experience with digital accessibility, so they invited me to contribute to this talk, and I'm honored to be here. So these are budget considerations for developing accessible digital tools. What I mean by digital tools is well, websites for one, but we also have other things like online services. Now there's mobile apps, there's chatbots. So digital tools can mean a lot of different things. As with everything else, when you're developing a digital tool, you need to be aware of the diversity and the range of the abilities of all the people who might use your tool. So, you know, some people might not see well, or they might not see at all. They might not hear well or hear at all. They might not speak well or speak at all. They might not move well or at all. And some people might say, well, what's that got to do with, you know, digital tools? But some people actually have trouble clicking a mouse, or if you are using a smartphone, they might actually have trouble with tapping things. And the other one to consider especially is people might have trouble processing information in certain formats. They might not be able to do it well, or they might not be able to do it at all. So people using your whatever digital tool you're developing, they can have both visible and invisible needs. So how do we deal with that from a budgetary point of view? Next slide, please. Okay, so in general, with a lot of things, you have two general options. One is you use internal resources, and the other one is you use external resources. So in terms of internal resources, like if you have a development team, do your current staff need training in developing accessible tools? Or do you need to hire new staff with the required skills and experience? So it's quite astonishing, but a lot of existing digital tools out there are not accessible to begin with. They don't actually teach a lot of the developers coming out of schools these days, they don't teach them accessibility in school. Some of them do, but it might just be like one day or, you know, an hour or something in all of the training that they get. So this is why I say your current staff might need training. Accessibility is a bit of a buzzword right now in the for-profit sector, so that's starting to change. But yes, a lot of online tools out there are not accessible. So that means that you need to put in a certain amount of effort when you're designing and developing digital tools in order to make them accessible. So one option is dealing with it internally. The other one is to use an external resources. So when you are using an external resources, try and choose a vendor who has a proven track record of developing accessible tools. By proven track record, I mean, do they have a portfolio which actually shows that they've developed accessible tools? So in the case, so the OCASI example here we're giving is the website Welcome Ontario. So Welcome Ontario can be found at welcomeontario.ca. And the website underwent a redesign. We had an external resource do the redesign. And the cost came to $14,000. Now, one thing to keep in mind, so Welcome Ontario is a medium to small website. It's mostly consists of articles and event postings. So it's mostly about sharing content. This cost included only development. Other parts of designing the digital tool was actually done internally. So UX and visual design and content development and content translations were done internally by 3 full-time staff. So this cost here is just for the development of the site. Next slide, please. So in order to be sure that your digital tool is accessible, really the only way to be as sure as possible is that you test it on real people. So again, this can be done by your internal staff. So again, your staff may need training, or you may need to hire new staff who have expertise in testing digital tools, or again, you might use an external resource. Regardless of the option, test participants need to be compensated for their time. So just to give you an example of what we were doing at OCASI, So settlement, the website settlement.org, at settlement.org, we had a user survey for it a couple of years ago. And there was a budget for it where of $4,500. This was used to purchase $30 $100 and $30 $50 Amazon gift cards, which were distributed to 60 participants. So yeah, so you also need to keep in mind that, you know, there are additional costs involved with testing your digital tools to make sure it's accessible. Next slide, please. So once you build your digital tool and it's accessible, you've tested it, it's developed, it's accessible. Now you have to maintain it and keep it accessible. So digital tools are a lot like cars. It needs regular maintenance. If you don't, you know what happens to a car if you don't, you know, do regular maintenance. Same thing happens with a digital tool. So again, the same two options. Do you do this internally or do you do this externally? So if you're doing it internally, do your internal staff need training, or do you need to hire new staff? Or do you hire an external resource? Again, if you're hiring an external resource, double check that they do have they've worked with other accessible tools before. If they haven't, they might actually make your tool less accessible, which is not what you want. So just to give an example, so going back to the Welcome Ontario website, Welcome Ontario website is up for an update of the backend code. So it's a version upgrade of the framework. We're going to use the same vendor as the redesign, and the estimate they gave us was $1,320. And this is for about 12 hours of work. And the one thing to keep in mind is you should expect, if you're doing maintenance on a digital tool, you should expect to do this at least every 4 to 6 months. Yes, every 4 to 6 months. And this is actually in line with industry standards when it comes to any kind of digital tool right now. So this is the amount, but yeah, you need to budget for this to happen continuously throughout the life of your digital tool. Next slide, please. Okay, so with digital tools, so I've talked mostly about development right now. So there's actually two parts to building a accessible digital tool. One is making sure that the code is accessible. So developers help you do that. The other part is making sure the content is accessible. So when you're first building your tool, you should make sure the content you're putting into it is accessible. But also content tends to change more often on any kind of tool, especially websites. And new or outdated content can make your tool less accessible. So this could happen because you have new content contributors who aren't following accessible content best practices. Yes, there are accessible content best practices. We will get to that shortly. Another way your tool can be accessible is if you have broken links and images. So by broken links, I mean you click on the link and it tells you this page doesn't exist anymore. Broken images is there's supposed to be an image, but the image doesn't show up because that image isn't where it's supposed to be anymore. So you can do this internally, monitoring if your content is continuing to be accessible or not. But if your digital tool has a lot of content, it might be too time consuming to monitor manually. So there are actually third-party services that will scan the pages of, say, your website and track where these sort of details need to be fixed. So in the case of OCASI, we actually pay a company called Moncito for their platform and services, $5,600 a year. This cost includes 1,000 web pages and 100 PDFs. And we also have a nonprofit discount. So, and this includes the websites settlement.org, New Youth, and Welcome Ontario. So just one thing to keep in mind, there are third-party services like this that will scan, but these third-party services will not fix the issues for you. So you also probably need to budget for the fact that you need someone to actually then take the results of this scanning service and actually put these fixes into place. Yeah, so next slide, please. So we've moved on to the topic of content, and I'd like to talk a little bit about budget considerations for developing accessible content and resources. So just like developing digital tools, developing accessible content and resources, you need to be aware of the diversity and the range of the abilities of the people who might use your content or resources. And why should this matter? Well, the more accessible you make your content and resources, in other words, the less it matters what someone's abilities are in terms of accessing your content and resources, the more people will make use and benefit from your content and resources. I mean, you don't want to develop your content and have no one use it. So this is a good thing to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So in terms of developing content, so there's a couple of things to consider when you're thinking about the accessibility of the content and resources. So one is writing and formatting. When I say writing and formatting, there are best practices for accessible print resources. There's best practices for accessible websites and web pages. And there's best practices for accessible social media. So these are all things that whoever's doing this work needs to be aware of. Again, you have two options. One is you use internal resources. So do your current staff need training in writing and editing accessible content? Or do you need to hire new staff who already have that experience? If you're using external resources, it tends to be pretty difficult. So we have a lot of very specific subject matter in the settlement sector. It will be probably difficult to find a subject matter expert who's also able to write or develop content so it's accessible. So you either will need to pay for additional resources to edit that subject matter expert's content, or you may have to try and figure out how you're going to do that internally. So there is no OCASI example for this because we just happen to have internal staff that can who do know how to write and edit it for accessible content. So we unfortunately don't have an example to give you in terms of budgeting, but we do have an example saying that, you know, yes, this can be done internally. Next slide, please. So other than writing, you know, images and diagrams are also content. So in terms of images and diagrams, what I might mean is, so simple images and diagrams are just photos or illustrations, they're pictures. But there are also more complex ones. For example, logos are actually complex. A really popular one we see right now is infographics or charts or diagrams. These are the kind of images and diagrams that, you know, you have imagery combined with text, and these are quite complex. And you need to keep in mind to keep these accessible. And so there's actually two parts to making images and diagrams accessible. One is creating an image or diagram so it's accessible. And then the other one is sharing it so it's accessible. So for example, on social media. So again, two options. Do you use internal resources? Do your internal resources need training in these areas? Or do you need to hire new staff? Or do you use external resources? If you are using an external resources, make sure you choose an illustrator designer, again, who has a proven track record of making accessible images and diagrams. They should have examples in their portfolio, not just, oh yeah, I've done that before, or I know what that is. Yeah. So again, in terms of OCASI, we actually don't have any examples to give you because we happen to be lucky to have internal resources who are able to do these sort of things. So again, this is an example of where, yes, it is possible to have staff that can do it for you internally. Next slide, please. So videos and animations. So Tekla talked a little bit about videos in terms of events and events and live things happening. Where are my notes on this? So again, this is similar to diagrams and images. There's two parts to making a video or animation accessible. You have to produce it so it's accessible. And then you have to share it so it's accessible. So again, like on YouTube, like you're sharing a video. You could have an accessible video produced for you, but when you share it on YouTube, if you don't do the right things, you might make it inaccessible. So again, do you use internal resources for this? Or do you use external resources? Again, as with everything, if you're using external resources, make sure the vendor you're using, they have examples in their portfolio of accessible videos or animations. So an example of an OCASI example, so the Accessibility Initiative had a beautiful promo video done a couple of years ago. It's about 4 minutes. It's in English and in French. It has a voiceover and it also has captions. These are all things to make the video accessible. And then there's other considerations, but we won't go into that here. So that video costs $4,560, including HSD. So if you're thinking of doing any kind of video, this is just the cost for production. And then there's, do you need to train your staff in terms of how to share this video online and keep it accessible? Next slide, please. So newsletters. Newsletters is a type of content that this sector really seems to like. Newsletters are actually web pages. So a lot of the best practices around developing accessible web content actually apply to newsletters. So newsletters need to have accessible code and accessible content. So it's not just the content part. There's a code aspect you need to think about too. The good news is there are a lot of third-party services that can provide you with newsletter templates that if you use properly, they already have accessible code and then options to format your content so it's accessible. The bonus of using these third-party services is there are also legal requirements around sending bulk emails. So these third-party services can help you also meet those legal requirements, but that's a bonus. So for example, the website settlenet.org has a monthly newsletter. We use MailChimp, a third-party service. We're on their standard plan. It allows 10,000 contacts, and we have a nonprofit discount, and we pay $172.86 per month. So if you're planning on having a newsletter, this is again another cost to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, the PDF issue. The question is to PDF or not to PDF. This sector also loves PDFs. And some bad news, PDFs actually aren't accessible by default. They need to be made accessible after being converted to a PDF. We've been asked before, how do I make an accessible PDF template? There actually is no such thing as an accessible PDF template because a document never starts as a PDF. They're usually converted to PDF from something else. So some formats, so PDF is a file format, right? So some other file formats that are more accessible or more easy to make accessible are text and rich text format, text, TXT, and RTF. HTML and web pages are actually much easier to make accessible. And also Word or Google documents also tend to be more accessible than PDFs. Next slide, please. So if you decide to not use a PDF, then so a couple of options. Like I said, you can publish your content or your resources as an HTML. So you could do this on your organization's website, or you could do it actually on, like, if you add your resource as content on, say, the website settlenet.org, which is a community of practice for the settlement sector. You're actually sharing it in a more accessible format than actually sharing it as a PDF. Or you could have a microsite developed for your content if it's, it's a lot of content. So the other option would be to publish it as what's called an Office document. So what I mean by Office document are documents like Microsoft Word, Google Docs. There are actually a couple of other formats out there, but yeah, so Microsoft Word comes with a built-in accessibility checker. Of course, you have to pay money to use Microsoft Word at your organization probably, so that's the budgetary consideration there. You also need to learn how to use the accessibility checker and sort of interpret what it's telling you. So there may be some training needs there. So Google Docs by default doesn't have an accessibility checker, but there is a similar extension that you can add. So OCASI is a Google shop. So we have been inquiring about this extension. And the quote they gave us was $5,000 per year and for 50 users. They said it would be about $136 per user per year. And this is with a nonprofit discount. And this would give you the extension for actually to use on Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides to check the accessibility of your Office document. Yeah, next slide, please. So say you really do want to develop a PDF, and there are valid reasons for doing this. So there's two basic steps if you want to. There are two basic steps to developing a accessible PDF that if you need to go that route, you need to follow. So the first step is before you convert it to PDF. So if you're using an external resource to do this, choose a designer who has examples in their portfolio of producing accessible documents. And usually what this means is they should probably be using a software called Adobe InDesign. This is a software that's known for helping you make the most accessible PDFs before you actually convert it to PDF. So in the case of OCASI, the Accessibility Initiative is currently having a GBB toolkit developed, and it's costing them $5,000. I think it's like an 80-page document, full color. So if you're thinking of doing PDFs, then this is one thing to consider. So before you convert it to PDF, okay, so you've got this InDesign file that's as accessible as possible. But then when you convert it to PDF, the resulting PDF could be even more accessible. In order to get there, you actually have to do extra work. Now you can have this done internally by your staff manually, but it's actually quite time consuming. So if you don't have the time or the resources to do that, there are third parties that provide what's called PDF remediation services, and they will make your PDF as accessible as possible. So Accessibility Initiative, recently, their new accessibility toolkit, just for the English version, it cost them $483 to do the PDF remediation on the PDF version. And so the cost was $672 a page. And that's just the English version. There's actually a French version. So, multiply that by 2 for, if you're developing a bilingual resource. That's all I have to say on these two topics. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll be going to the Q&A, the question and answer session. So we have some questions already asked. And the first question is, why do we need to budget when we know that we do not have newcomers with disability? I'm just wondering, Etta, will you want to tackle that?
Sure, thank you. So this is a good question. Actually, we cannot assume if a person has disabilities or not. And a lot of newcomer clients to the agencies seeking services. So we need to make sure that the requirements are met. Definitely, they will ask for certain services. Then you have to be ready for that. For example, earlier you talked about, handling mouses and keyboards. Most probably a newcomer might, come not in a wheelchair. Sometimes we assume a person with disabilities is with a wheelchair or with a cane. We can't assume that. There are visible and invisible disabilities. So if a person comes walking and talking, but have disability, to use your computers in your organization, for example, you have to make sure that the client would be able to use the services you provide. Our advice is that it doesn't mean that you have to start providing services for a person with disabilities. The right agency might be somewhere else, but you need to know who provides those services. For example, in Toronto, I don't know, in other parts of Canada, there is an organization called Silent Voice. They provide settlement services as well as other services for deaf people. But at least you should be able to provide basic information or to refer them or to use their services that require their needs. And also, if a person comes from a different country, not speaking English or French, you need a interpreter. You invite or you bring someone to interpret. But if the person is, require ASL, that means you need to bring an interpreter that speaks the language of the client, and then ASL interpreter that will translate to the interpreter using the ASL that is required for the service. So we need to be aware of these complexities in terms of ASL, and everybody, American Sign Language, everybody doesn't really understand. So every country have their own sign language, and that need to be taken into consideration. Referring them to services that provide, to the disability sector might not be the answer. So depending on where you are at, some of the disability sector don't provide settlement services. So, and these clients shouldn't be left behind because, your organization doesn't have the accessibility option. Tekla or Siham, if you want to add.
Yes, Miyuki?
Can I answer that actually?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one misconception is that accessibility isn't just about disabilities, it's about just abilities. So like a great example, especially in the settlement services sector, is someone for whom English or French is not their first language. They've already got a barrier in front of them because of the, their differences in ability in terms of English or French. They don't have a disability, but there's still a barrier there. Seniors have much more trouble using technology. I mean, understandably so. They don't have a disability, but there's still this barrier in front of them in terms of accessing content or accessing services. There's a thing called a temporary disability. A great example is this: if someone breaks their arm, say if you're right-handed, you break your right arm, you are temporarily disabled. So you, like Etta was saying, we really don't know if you might say, oh, we don't serve people with disabilities, but that's really not the issue. It's making sure that people can access services and content, regardless of how they're doing. So that's my 2 cents. Tekla, Siham?
I think that's clear.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, because of time, we'll go to the next question. So that is for you, Miyuki. Does the company OCASI uses to maintain website content Monsido, both scan and fix?
No, most of these services will only scan. It's up to you to actually read the reports, figure out what they're telling you, and then fix the issues. I mean, I guess you could pay someone else to do that for you. But in our case, we have internal staff who already know how to do that. So we're very fortunate that way. But no, scanning is only half of the puzzle. You have to then take those results and fix it. And actually, some of the things that those services scan for, they're more like, you need to check this because this might be an accessibility issue. So it's not just about fixing it, but yet before you even fix it, you need to see if it's a problem. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things in terms of digital accessibility that it's not mechanical. So, you need to actually do things manually. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. So you can just go to the Q&A. You have other questions. Then you can address them one by one.
Where do vendors like Accessibility, who are third-party vendors for making websites accessible, stand because they seem much cheaper than what the numbers shared? So this is an example of make sure your vendor has a proven track record of developing accessible digital tools. Accessibility is, so these tools are called accessibility widgets or accessibility overlays. This is where how accessibility is like becoming a buzzword in the for-profit sector. This is the bad influence that it's having. These tools like Accessibility, they actually will only make your website, I would say, about 25% accessible. The rest of it needs to be done by an actual person, developer. You can't have, and this goes back to how I was saying a lot of accessibility issues have to be reviewed and fixed manually. You can't have a machine do it for you. And this is actually a great example of that. Just a warning, companies like Accessibility in the US, where accessibility laws are much more stringent right now, they have actually been taken to court for making websites inaccessible or getting in the way of those that do have real accessibility needs from actually accessing content. So yes, they seem cheaper, but there's a reason why they seem cheaper.
Yeah, the next question I think it is for you, Miyuki. What do you mean by accessible code? Can you explain that a little more?
It's like when you're writing content, there's best practices for writing content. There are best practices for writing computer code. Like code is usually what's used to behind any kind of tool. It might be a website, your mobile app or whatnot. But yeah, there are certain best practices that need to be followed when code is also being written. I don't know if there's any other way to. Does that seem clear? I'm not sure if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, I think that's fine. The next question is, yeah, I may have missed this. Was it mentioned that when developing video to ensure to caption it, is this essential to comply with IODA and have it accessible? So this is the national audience. IODA is for Ontario, but it is covered under the National Accessibility Act. I think that the reason we are emphasizing this, if, for example, now we might post this webinar on our website, and we want to make sure that the captioning or the it is accessible. That is why we need a captioner. As you know, Google Translate that, or it have this closed captioning. But sometimes, like me, if I have an accent, it creates its own word, its own language. So you want to make sure that what is spoken is properly closed captioned and is accessible by everyone. So that is why we talk about another captioner, making sure that all that is has been spoken within the presentation is closed captioned properly. Okay, so the next question is, will the recording of this session, Tekla?
Yes, so if you had registered, then we have your email, we will send it.
So there is a question. Ironically, when I downloaded and tried to open the file included in the chat in this webinar, this is a message I received and I don't know what the message is.
Do you want to, Tekla, later, do you want to share a copy of the slides that are just set to view only?
Yes,
That
so
might be better.
Yeah, so we will send up the slides immediately after the presentation. The video will follow up later after we do the accessibility part, but also I've copied the PowerPoint version in the chat where you can download for now.
So the next question I will go through. The accessibility support are so important and they are also expensive. Do you have any suggestion on what is most important to prioritize? This is really, this webinar, provide the information as broadly as possible. It is up to the agencies to decide exactly what they need to do. Again, if you provide information and orientation to newcomers and you are not sure, of course you can ask if they need accommodation. If none of them need accommodation, you don't have to have an ASL interpreter. But if you have an event also, again, for mixed audiences, for settlement practitioners and newcomers at the same time, like, again, you need to ask if they need accommodation. But nowadays, actually, it is a must that you have to have an ASL. So it depends on the kind of services you provide, and it is up to you to prioritize. And it is what we want to emphasize here is it is expensive, and you need to budget that. Otherwise, you will not make your services accessible. The next question, or maybe it's an expensive biographer. You know, one of the things I guess Tekla and Siham can share that. One of the things that they did in Calgary at the metropolis is they talk about making services available, and there were IRCC representatives in that audience, and they say, unless you ask, we wouldn't know. So I think you have to ask, you have to justify that. According to legislation, Canada or the provincial, we have to make our services accessible. So we need to submit that. If not OCASI, we were not really submitting. We just simply say accessibility to sound, which is not really nothing. But through experience, we have learned it requires, and it is expensive. But the legislation requires it. If the legislation requires it, then we need to include that budget in our IRCC proposal and see. I mean, my thinking is what those two people said, unless you ask it, we will not give you. Maybe that is their attitude. Any other?
Yeah, there is a suggestion in the chat. So someone is saying that we have found the best way to provide clear access for the deaf is hire deaf to sign the message. Okay, so someone, it is from the chat. So it's a suggestion of hiring a deaf staff to sign the message to clients.